Hello everybody, and welcome to this Icorian deck tech. Today, I am here to share with you my least monster-friendly deck, helmed by Kelsien the Plague. Kelsien is a legendary human assassin that costs a red, a white, and a black, has vigilance and haste, and is a 2/2, and gets +1/+1 for each experience counter you have. Then has tap, it deals 1 damage to target creature I don't control, and then when that creature dies this turn, I get an experience counter. Since his release with the Ruthless Regiment deck, a part of Commander 2020 decks, I've been racking my brain trying to build a deck with Kelsien, but I was lacking a strong enough theme to support my desire to build around him. Then I played Monster Hunter, and it dawned on me, a Monster Hunter themed deck, centered around a particular hunter. I support the idea that all EDH Commander players should try and build a Voltron deck to try out the format's special Commander damage rule. My first one, many years ago, was helmed by Ruhan of the Fomori, around the idea that I don't really want the table to hate me once I eliminate one of my opponents, so I'll just let the dice roll decide who gets hit. But this was many years ago, as I said. Kelsien, being a denizen of Ikoria, and particularly an inhabitant of Dranith, has a truly vitriolic hatred of monsters and dedicates all of his efforts to exterminate all monsters in the plane. As usual, I'll be dividing this deck tech into sections, going over its philosophy, themes, cards, and finally some tips, in case you want to try out Kelsien as a commander to shoot your opponent's little monsters yourself. First up, the philosophy. This deck is, as I said, centered around Ikoria's particular balance between humans and non-human creatures, and Kelsien's hate-fueled crusade against the non-humans. Sadly, as it has become a bit of a theme, Kelsien's lore is very limited, being that we only know that he comes from Dranith, and that his hatred of non-humans was taught, so to speak, to him because of the ancient city of Orn being raised by monsters. If I'm not mistaken, it was raised by Snapducks, the Mardu apex, and its destruction is depicted in the card Mythos of Snapducks. As such, this deck tries to emulate Kelsien's preparations to go out hunting monsters, which, in the context of, the table, would be my opponent's creatures and my opponents themselves, crossed with Monster Hunter's mechanics, where the player chooses which weapons they will use by studying the monster's weaknesses. As such, the deck runs a suite of protective equipment and a very small number of humanoid creatures which represent people that either aid Kelsien during the hunt, or folks that participate before or after the hunt is complete. Also, since I imagine hunting a gigantic monster capable of suddenly mutating would be a very arduous task, I felt it necessary to include ways to avert the worst of outcomes, Kelsien's death at the jaws of a Tyrannox Rex or worse. As per usual, I do not use tutors in this deck, as I feel that would make the game a very frantic search for a very particular combo that in this deck essentially becomes no one else can control creatures, which is Thornbite Staff and anything that gives Kelsien Death Touch. Now, onto the themes. As I said, this deck is very focused on emulating how I imagine Kelsien would hunt, representing different tools he would use, be them weapons or supporting tools, the different strategies and approaches he would use, and the people he would interact before setting off on the hunt, during the hunt, or after he would return carrying monster parts to sell, as well as the stories he would tell to promote these sales. Now let's move on to the meat of the deck, the cards. First up, the lands. We only have 2 colorless lands in Arcane Lighthouse and Homeward Path. My playgroup doesn't really run theft cards, so Homeward Path isn't really a meta choice. It's more of a card that represents Kelsien's return to Dranith. And I feel it was very important to represent that. He not only goes out to hunt, but he comes back home. And the Arcane Lighthouse is more of a mechanic choice, since it will allow me to shoot my opponent's creatures even if they have hexproof or shroud. Now onto the monocolored lands. We have 3 of each basic, each of them showing off a different art from Ikoria, which in this deck to me it feels very appropriate, since as a hunter Kelsien would run throughout Ikoria to find the creatures, and as such he would not only hunt in Savai, the place where the region where Dranith is situated, but also go through Ketria and Hogrin for the red, Zagoth and Indatha for the black, and for the white, Hogrin also again, and let's see if I can remember, Indatha as well. To also accompany this trekking theme, we have the 3 pathways, which I believe make a lot of sense, since though humans are in not really short supply, but they are the minority in Ikoria, there are pathways to cross these harsh terrains onto the dual colored lands, as usual, and something that brings me a lot of mental comfort, so to speak. I try to run only complete cycles. So we have here the cycle of the Shocklands, the Dominaria United Taplands, the Snarls, including the Foreboding Ruins, which, I mean, Kelsien comes from a city that was built after the complete ruination of Orn. These could be the representation of said ruins. The Taplands, Azalita Chapel, Dragon Skull Summit, and Clifftop Retreat. To me, the retreat is a perfect place for Kelsien to be perched atop and surveying the region in search of monsters. The Midnight Hunt Crimson Vow lands, the Shattered Sanctum, another, in my mind, reference to the ruined city of Orn, the Haunted Ridge and the Sundown Pass, the Alpha Duels, Scrubland, Badlands and Plateau, and the Filterlands. To me, let's take a step back, so to speak, and think that all the cards that represent human places aren't really, except 1 or 2, perhaps the Sacred Foundry and the Isolated Chapel, they aren't really human occupied places. The Godless Shrine doesn't need to be a shrine to a human recognized god. It could be a gathering place for monsters to, so to speak, worship, in a way, their apex monsters. In Savai that would be Snapdax. And the Snarls to me represent natural confluences of mana, where 2 ley lines cross and generate powerful maelstroms of energy and mana. And to finish up the lands, we have only 3 actually, Rainbow Lands. We have Savai Triome, obviously. This had to be here. The Forbidden Orchard and the Plaza of Heroes, each representing, in my mind at least, 2 very different locations. The Plaza of Heroes would be a place in Dranith where the Coppercoats, the legions of people defending Dranith from monsters, and the people that also go out hunting, are honored, especially the Fallen. And the Forbidden Orchard, to me, represents a place in Ikoria where there is an abundance of fruit-bearing trees, but it is forbidden because there are a lot of monsters around. Since there is food, monsters congregate, and so people have deemed this place to be forbidden. Both of them also have a very mechanical use. The Forbidden Orchard always supplies me with 1/1 creatures which Kelsien can shoot to then grant me experience counters, and the Plaza of Heroes is, so to speak, a very last-ditch effort to protect Kelsien, because I can pay 3 and tap it, and exile the Plaza of Heroes, and target legendary creature gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So if things get real dire, I can always save Kelsien. Being that this is a Voltron deck, that is a very important aspect to consider, since he will be completely suited up and able to not only kill creatures, but kill opponents. And as such, protecting Kelsien is paramount to the success of the deck. On to the creatures. We have White Plume Adventurer. It's an Orc Cleric, okay, so fits the humanoid, non-monster theme. And yes, gaining the initiative and going through that dungeon, I don't feel it's very thematic to the deck. However, a dungeon could also be a system of caves Kelsien goes into to explore and try to set up traps and find monsters. But the most important thing this card grants me is the ability to untap Kelsien on my opponent's untap steps, giving me the ability to shoot more arrows, kill more creatures, and get more experience counters. Minthara, Merciless Soul, another card that synergizes very well with experience counters, giving my creatures +1/+0 for each experience counter, effectively giving Kelsien +2/+1 for each experience counter. The way to gain experience counters from her is not something I will use. I'm not really killing my own permanents. Sram, Senior Edificer. In my mind, this guy is someone that conducts... I know he's Kaladeshian. Let's forget that. Assuming he is in Ikoria, he would be a very important person in Dranith, as he would oversee the edification of the walls, and how the city should defend itself against monsters really comes down to how well the walls are built and how the city is organized. Since, at least in the lore, the city is built around a giant crystal that is, so to speak, a brother to the Ozolith. That crystal is named the Argolith, which glows when monsters are near. General's Enforcer. Oh, by the way, I forgot. Sram is also a powerful draw engine, since the deck is very focused on artifacts, particularly equipments. The General's Enforcer. I see this guy as someone that always has Kelsien's back, given that he gives legendary creatures I control indestructible. Plus, whenever Kelsien goes out to hunt, he will never be able to bring back the whole carcass. How would a 2/2 human bring an 11/11 creature back across many, many miles? Impossible. As such, the Enforcer, in my mind at least, accompanies Kelsien and disposes of the monster's remains as not to attract necrophages. Thus, its ability to exile creatures from graveyards and giving me 1/1 human soldier creature tokens. Essentially, he brings food. By eliminating the monster's carcasses, he gives food to the people, and they come to him. Danithica Passion, Paragon. I mean, I always feel this card is a bit too much. 3 for a 2/2 with First Strike, Vigilance, and Lifelink. Very powerful. And reduces the cost of my auras and equipment. In this deck, let's just eliminate the aura. It just reduces the cost of my equipments. I don't really have a personal lore for her. She's very much a mechanical pick for the deck. However, she's a human, as all of these are. We have an orc, we have a dwarf, we have an elf. They are all humanoid creatures. Now, perhaps one of the most powerful cards that perfectly synergizes with Kelsien. Mari, the Killing Quill. To me, she is the master of the Hunters Guild in Dranith. She's the one that has killed the most monsters, and she is recognized among all as the top. She is the best. Her abilities say, whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, exile it with a hit counter. This wording is very particular and very good, because many cards say, if a creature would die, exile it instead, which for Kelsien is an on-bow, because I need the creature to go to the graveyard. This not only lets it go to the graveyard, but exiles it. And the second line says, assassins, mercenaries, and rogues you control have Death Touch. Perfect for Kelsien to be able to one-shot, one-kill my opponent's creatures. And whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, you may remove a hit counter from a card that player owns in exile. If you do, draw a card and create 2 tokens. Ramp, draw, and Death Touch. This girl has won me games, just because she's on the field. Plus, she's 3/2, and she's a humanoid. Yes, she's a vampire, as such. Let's say she is a special vampire that does not drink the blood of humans. Let's put it that way. Pure Steel Paladin. Another more mechanical pick, because whenever an equipment enters the battlefield under my control, I draw a card, I may draw a card, and has Metalcraft. My equip costs are, I can equip my equipment for 0 if I have 3 or more artifacts, which in this deck is not that hard. Termination Facilitator. This card in particular, when I looked at it, I felt, perfect! This guy is the one that writes the bounties. He literally writes a notice to post on the guild board. Hey, there is this massive serpent jellyfish monster that has been wandering around the walls of Dranith. We need it killed. Its abilities, to me at least, they make perfect sense. Tap, put a bounty counter on a creature, on target creature or planeswalker, activate only as a sorcery, and then a passive. Whenever a creature or planeswalker an opponent controls with a bounty counter on it is dealt damage, destroy it. In a way, it gives targeted death touch. That thing over there needs to die. Kelsien can kill it. And the card that synergizes, again, in my mind, perfectly with this is Matha's Fiend Seeker, another Mardu legend, 3 for 3/3 with Menace. At the beginning of your end step, put a bounty counter on target creature an opponent controls. For as long as that creature has a bounty counter on it, it has. When this creature dies, each opponent draws a card and gains 2 life. So, 2 ways to put bounty counters on, and Mathas's bounty counters also trigger this guy's static ability. Plus life gain and draw. Perfect combo! And the last, and I see her as a hunting partner for Kelsien. Akiri, Fearless Voyager. A draw engine. Whenever I attack a player with 1 or more equipped creatures, I draw a card. And for a white, I may unattach an equipment from a creature you control. If I do, tap that creature and it gains indestructible until end of turn. Amazing. She can protect Kelsien and grant me some draws while I attack. These 10 creatures are the only creatures in the deck, and I feel I'm very proud that I was able to only run humanoid creatures. Yes, 2 of them are vampires, both Mathas and Mari, but I feel they would be welcome since they are not outright monsters. Now on to the big meat of the deck, the artifacts. For Kelsien to work to its fullest potential, you need 2 things, specifically to him. You need Death Touch, so that 1 point of damage can kill a big creature, and you need ways to untap Kelsien. Since this deck is very focused on the theme of Monster Hunter, I am not running auras. As you can see here, there are only 3 enchantments. None of them are auras. I know Gift of Doom is the perfect aura for Kelsien. I don't care. I wanted it to be around equipment. And some equipments, or some cards here, some artifacts, I feel really capture the idea of using monster parts to craft equipment for you. Let's begin. So we have Basilisk's Collar, Death Touch and Lifelink. Perfect! Since in Monster Hunter, at least in Monster Hunter Rise, you have an amulet, you can use an amulet. This to me is Kelsien's amulet. It makes him deadlier. I also run a gamut of swords. You'll see more of them as we go down. Sword of Forge and Frontier. I haven't had the chance to try her out very much, but the point of using the swords here is to make Kelsien harder to block, since Rogue's Passage. To me, it represents a very human thing. It would make more sense in a deck that, at least in a commander, that spends most of its time in the city. There isn't really a small alleyway in the vast cavern systems of Savai. Quietus Spike, another Death Touch granter. The first of the non-equipment artifacts, Tome of Legends. To me, this card represents Kelsien's recording of his exploits, a way for him to, in a way, sell his brand as a master hunter. He would need stories to tell, and there is, if I'm not mistaken, the card Dark Bargain has a flavor text by Kelsien where he explains exactly that. Most people don't buy the monster part for the part, or at least that's not the most important thing. The most important is the story behind the killing of the monster. Champion's Helm, a protection equipment giving Kelsien +2/+2 and hexproof, since he's a legendary creature, and an important piece of equipment. In Monster Hunter, you always need your helm. Another sword, Fire and Ice, undoubtedly among the strongest swords. Sanctuary Blade, another protection granting card that is specifically Icorian, since the cities in Icoria are known to the humans as sanctuaries. So this is literally a sword forged in Dranith, or perhaps Lavabring, since that's the place where the best equipments are forged in Icoria. Patriarch's Seal, a way to untap Kelsien, plus a mana rock, and the seal to me is, if the high-ranking people of Dranith, particularly General Kudro, needs a monster to be killed, he will issue a decree, a summons to all the hunters, and stamp it with the seal. Sword of the Paruns, a card that allows me to control Kelsien's tap and tap state. The rest of the card isn't really important. Oh, and by the way, in Monster Hunter, you can use bladed weapons, such as the double blades, 2 daggers, the long sword, and there are axes and other weapons, but sadly, I think I only run 1 axe in the deck. I wasn't able to find an equipment that I liked for each weapon type in Monster Hunter. How the hell would I find a hunting horn in Magic? We don't have those. The Swiftfoot Boots, a staple in any Voltron deck. Plus, if you're going to trek mountains, swamps, plains, and all kinds of treacherous terrains, you need good footwear. Sword of Sinew and Steel. I mean, this to me, the sinew part really resonates with my idea of Kelsien shooting the creatures, slicing the creatures. I mean, you need to break those. The axe of the deck, the blood-forged battle axe, which, I mean, I feel it's very flavorful that as Kelsien attacks, he makes more axes. The axe drinks the blood of the hunted quarry and grants Kelsien even more strength. The Shadow Spear, another card that allows me to bypass my opponent's protections, giving me the ability to remove hexproof and indestructible from my opponent's creatures. Actually, this says permanent, but Kelsien can only shoot creatures. Another monster part, Gorgon's Head. This literally just grants Kelsien Death Touch. Perfect. It grants, I mean, the Gorgon's Head is bleeding, and let's imagine that that blood is the thing that is very toxic. Kelsien coats his arrows in poison, and then shoots them. Kitchener's Cloak. I know this is not the best equipment in the world, but it's made of chitin, which is something you can extract from bugs. And Icoria, I would imagine, even Icorian bugs would be several meters tall. So perfect to make an armor. The combo piece, Thornbite Staff. Staffs are usually used to aid in traversing terrain, so we have that. And the ability to untap Kelsien whenever a creature dies, plus Death Touch, makes Kelsien essentially a machine gun that kills everything in sight. Still haven't been able to pull off this combo, and I doubt once I pull it off, people will allow me to play Kelsien. Illusionist Bracers. Why shoot one arrow when you can shoot two and kill two creatures with one arrow? Perfect. Another untapper, Mage Right Stone. Another card that protects Kelsien in Dark Steel Plate, giving him indestructible. Oh look, another sword. Feast and Famine. This name at least makes me think of Kelsien being very hungry during a particularly long hunting trip, and then finding a monster, killing it, and cooking, I don't know, a dinosaur steak. I mean, that's a funny idea. A Dowsing Dagger can work as ramp, gives two creatures to one of my opponents, which I can then kill. I mean, I feel this card is a win-win-win. Then if Kelsien can connect with an opponent, it flips into a land that adds 3 mana of one color. Perfect. Another untapper in 1000-Year Elixir. In my mind, this is Kelsien's Canteen, where he stores his water for his long hunting trips. Sword of Light and Shadow. Another great card. I can only see me taking advantage of the gain 3 life. Since there are only 11 creatures in the deck, counting Kelsien, I'm not going to be recurring my creatures very often. Hammer of Nazan can make... It's a hammer, and Monster Hunter has a hammer, so... Here, my hammer. And the ability to simply, whenever an equipment enters the battlefield, attach it to a creature. Perfect. I'm in Mardu, I don't really have many ways to ramp. Plus, giving Kelsien indestructible. He needs to survive the board wipes. Sword of War and Peace. The deck has some cards that drain me life, and since I will not be having a lot of blockers, I feel that having ways to gain life is essential. Plus the ability to just make someone's hand hit themselves. I mean, it sounds funny. It just sounds funny to me. Thaumatic Compass, to help Kelsien navigate the vast expanses of terrain in Ikoria. Oops, we're running out of space. I think we're going to have to get these out of the way. For now, they'll come back. Gorgon Flail, another card that represents something made out of a creature, plus it grants Kelsien +1/+1 and Death Touch. And the last 2 swords, Sword of Truth and Justice and Sword of Hearth and Home. This one allows me to ramp, and if necessary I can blink a creature. I see that this card will mostly give me the ability to untap. I haven't had it come onto the field yet. Truth and Justice, let's just pump Kelsien, give him a counter, and proliferate my experience counters. I feel it's a perfect fit for the deck. Now let's move on to the rest. Let me just put all of these excellent pieces of equipment away. There we go. Moving on to the enchantments. As I said, we only have 3 enchantments in the deck. The least flavorful one, definitely, Sigarda's Aid. Ikoria has no angels. There is no salvation for humans. If you want to survive, you need to either be very smart or very deadly. Reconnaissance. Any good hunter would reconnoiter the field ahead of time to study its prey, their movements, their behavior before attacking. Oh, I forgot. Sigarda's Aid essentially in the deck is a very mechanical pick. I can cast my equipments with flash, and when they enter the battlefield I simply attach them. So essentially Kelsien snaps his fingers, a sword appears, and he grabs the sword. In Reconnaissance, I had to go study up the rules. Technically, a creature is considered as attacking if it attacked until the end of the combat step. So I can literally attack with Kelsien, tap him to deal the 1 damage, gain the experience counter, people block, etc., etc. He deals us combat damage. Before the end of combat, I pay 0 and untap Kelsien. So it functions as a more limited, but still very good, untap spell. And then the black market connections. Though Kelsien is a respected hunter in Dranith, I feel some things would not be readily available to the people, or him. As such, some black market connections may be necessary to procure more exotic items, let's say. On the mechanical side, this card is just bonkers. I feel I will almost never use the last ability, but this simply says, at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, choose one or more. Sell contraband, create a treasure token, you lose 1 life. Buy information, draw a card, you lose 2 life. Hire a mercenary, create a 3/2 colorless shapeshifter creature token with changeling, you lose 3 life. Honestly, I feel every time this card has come onto the field is, okay, untap, upkeep, draw. Beginning of pre-combat main phase, pay 3 life, get a treasure, draw a card. Makes sense to me. He sells his monster parts, and he buys information about the monster's comings and goings, and perhaps what people are most afraid of at that moment, so he can profit more. Now we go on to the non-permanent spells, starting with the instants. In this deck I felt the need, for the first time, to use cards that protect. However, since I also wanted to run the swords, since in Monster Hunter I play with the dual blades, so 1 blade in each hand, and I wanted to use the swords, there aren't many cards that... many of the protection spells, the targeted ones at least, are colored. As such, it's a bit of a non-bow, so I picked the 2 protection spells that also allowed me to protect my equipment. Lauren's Escape and Blacksmith's Skill. To help me protect... I mean, a Sword of Fire and Ice will always draw a lot of hate, so if absolutely necessary, I can protect it. Or if Kelsien doesn't have protection from white, I can protect him. Also, in the vein of that idea, I found this gem of a card. Usually fogs are known to exist in green, 1 or 2 in white. How about a fog in black? Darkness. In my mind, this card is Kelsien also has a smoke bomb in his stash, so when things get really bad, he just smoke bombs! And no one can hit me. And the more general protection cards. Flawless Maneuver, that actually represents the Copper Coats of Dranith protecting Dranith, and Teferi's Protection. I am not a fan of this card. I feel the card is a bit too overpowered, but in the context of this deck, I felt it's justified. This deck will easily attract a lot of hate from the table, and if played at the right moment, have only played it once, it led me to winning the game. I was gonna get alpha stricken, and I was like, how about no? And when I come back, I'm hitting you. Tremendous card, a bit too much. And we have 3 removal spells. Utter End, Anguished Unmaking, and Generous Gift. Utter End to me makes a lot of sense. If Kelsien's going to kill, he's going to kill completely. Anguished Unmaking, the name, it's more of a mechanical card. The ability to exile any non-land permanent at the cost of 1 white, black, and 3 life, at instant speed. Perfect. And the Generous Gift, at least to me, I feel Kelsien has both a sadistic streak and a sarcastic one. So here, let me give you a generous gift. Also, it gives you an elephant, which I can then kill to gain more experience. And now on to the last type. We have our sorceries. I'm just going to have to organize these a bit because we have some themes here. Let's start with the draw. For the first time in my deck building career, I felt the need to run the black spells that say pay life, draw cards. And I selected the ones that I felt were most flavorful. So we have Painful Truths. Not only Kelsien since he hunts and he travels throughout Ikoria, he can find the wreckage of human settlements, the painful truth that humans are at a disadvantage against creatures that fly, crawl, burrow, spit poison, can protect themselves, can mutate. I mean, truly, humans are at a very severe disadvantage. Read the Bones. After Kelsien kills his quarry, he can look at the bones. He knows how to extract knowledge from the creature's bones. A pair in Ancient Craving and Ambition's Cost. Ambition's Cost. If Kelsien is a bit too cocky for his own britches, he might get hurt. He'll learn, but he'll get hurt. And Ancient Craving, to me, represents Kelsien's long-lasting and deep desire to exterminate all the monsters in Ikoria. Another painful lesson: hunting monsters cannot be a painless endeavor, and this one fails a bit, but scales very well in Monumental Corruption. All of these, save Read the Bones, which allows me to scry, all of these say draw cards, lose life in equal measure. So draw 1, 2, or 3, lose 1, 2, or 3 life, depending on how many colors of mana you input. Draw 3, lose 3, draw 3, lose 3, scry 2, draw 2, lose 2. Target player draws 2 cards and loses 2 life. Monumental Corruption for 5 makes me draw X cards and lose X life, where X is the number of artifacts I have. Given the enormous number of equipments we saw, yes, this has the potential to be pay 5, draw 7, lose 7. And I hope now you understand better why both Sword of Light and Shadow and War and Peace are in the deck. I need to gain life if I'm going to be using these and still be attacked by my opponents. In the removal section here we have Vindicate. Again, Kelsien is vindictive. And 2 particular board wipes: Slash the Ranks and Single Combat. Since me losing the creatures that are not Kelsien is not very important, these board wipes allow me to do exactly that. Slash the Ranks destroys all creatures except commanders. Oh, all creatures and planeswalkers except commanders. Yes, Kelsien is going to survive that. And Single Combat states each player chooses a creature or planeswalker they control, then sacrifices the rest. Players can't cast creatures or planeswalker spells until the end of your next turn. Everything goes bye-bye. Plus Single Combat, I feel represents very well how Kelsien hunts. It's him, it's the monster, nothing else matters. And the last 2 sorceries are Fortuitous Find. Again, I feel this card is the golden trifecta for this deck. The name makes perfect sense to me. The ability to return a creature and or an artifact from my graveyard to my hand is perfect, and I really like the art. And Beacon of Unrest. Again, this card is a bit more mechanical than themed, but if you imagine that Ikoria has big concentrations of mana in all 5 colors, Kelsien could possibly find a place where black mana is highly concentrated, tap into that, and rebuild one of his equipments, or bring back a friend that has fallen in battle. With this, we have finished the cards. Moving on to the tips. To state the obvious, this is a Voltron deck whose main strategy to win is commander combat damage. Fortunately, Kelsien has a built-in power and toughness booster effect in the experience counters. Granted, usually he can only gain 1 per death, but as you've seen, there are ways to overcome this limitation. And there are avenues you can go down to further increase this. You can use cards like Teza Karlov or Drivnod that double the triggers of when creatures die. Kelsien's ability has an active part, the tap deal 1 damage, and the triggered part. When a creature dealt damage this way dies this turn, both Teza and Drivnod will double that, essentially for 1 death giving you 2 experience counters. You can also use Strionic Resonator to copy the trigger. There are also at least, let's see, 3 other creatures in Mardu colors that deal with experience counters. There is Kalemni, Daxos, and Othari. And Mintara, as you saw. I seriously considered using Othari in this deck because he's a very efficient experience counter generator, but I felt it would break the anti-monster theme since it's a Phoenix. And though in the lore he is a resistance-friendly Phoenix, he came out in the commander decks for Phyrexia All Will Be One. Kelsien is a human absolutist, let's say. Complementary to this idea of gaining more experience counters, and also as you saw, untapping. Ways to untap Kelsien, preferably during your opponent's turn. White Plume Adventurer is the epitome of this. I mean, this tips portion is mostly, let's state the obvious. I should get a Captain Obvious outfit. Because his ability, Kelsien's ability, is literally screams, give me Death Touch. Dealing 1 damage is not going to kill much, unless you're facing an opponent that has a lot of tokens, like a player playing Risk the Redeemed. But then you're not really dealing with the important creatures, Riz itself. So, giving him Death Touch. And, as I mentioned previously, Gift of Doom combines the 2 most important things for a Voltron deck and this Voltron deck. Giving Death Touch and giving Indestructible to Kelsien. I don't know if I stated this, but I didn't run that because, again, given this deck's focus on the Monster Hunter theme, what would be an aura in that world? A prayer? It just doesn't make sense to me. Plus, there are at least 6 ways this deck can give Kelsien Death Touch, and with the draw spells and the normal course of the game, I mean, pretty regularly I will be able to have at least 1 Death Touch piece on Kelsien. Up until now, whenever I played this deck, the table hasn't really hated me much because, fortunately, or unfortunately, I don't really start this game off with, okay, Death Touch, kill, 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 or a lot of untapping ways. I enjoy not really long games. 3-hour games is a no-no, but a game where each player at the table can at least get their deck to do a bit of what their decks were made to do. With this, we have reached the end. We have reached the end. Let me rephrase that. And with this, we conclude this foray into what hunting in Ikoria is like. Though this is a more limited commander in terms of what strategies it fits into, I feel all Voltron decks will inevitably fall in that particular pit, and that the fun is choosing how you want your Voltron deck to best suit you, the player. I sincerely hope you all have enjoyed this deck and now feel inspired to let out your most hate-fueled anti-monster rampage, destroy all of your opponent's creatures, and lead you to victory. Please do not forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more weekly deck techs and possibly more content. Also, if you have a suggestion for what deck or commander I should do a deck tech about, don't hesitate to comment them below. I hope to see you all next time.